My name is Beverly, and I'm 32 years old. I built my event planning empire from nothing, working my way up from a part-time hotel employee to owning three of the most prestigious venues in the city. When my little brother Craig asked me to fund his dream wedding with $50,000, I didn't hesitate for a second. Family comes first, always has, always will. Craig has been my world since our mother passed away when he was just 16. I raised him, supported him through college, and watched him grow into the successful man he is today. So when he called me 3 months ago, voice trembling with excitement about proposing to Sarah Wilson, I was over the moon. I was already mentally planning every detail of their perfect day. Little did I know that one phone call from his wedding planner would shatter everything I believed about family loyalty. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories. Trust me, you won't believe how this wedding disaster unfolds. To understand how devastating this betrayal was, you need to know the foundation Craig and I built together. After Mom died from cancer, Dad disappeared completely. He couldn't handle the grief, the responsibility, or the reality of raising two kids alone. So at 20, I dropped out of college and became Craig's guardian. I worked double shifts at the Marriott downtown, starting as a housekeeper and clawing my way up to assistant event coordinator. Those were brutal years. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to prepare Craig's lunch work until midnight, organizing corporate events, then come home to help him with homework and make sure he felt loved despite losing everything. Craig was brilliant even then. He sailed through high school with perfect grades and earned a full scholarship to study computer engineering. While he was building his future, I was building mine too, just differently. I saved every penny, learned every aspect of the hospitality business, and slowly started freelancing as a wedding planner on weekends. My first venue purchase happened when Craig was a senior in college. I'd scraped together enough for a down payment on a small banquet hall in the suburbs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. By the time Craig graduated and landed his first job as a software engineer, I owned Grandiose Ballroom downtown, had launched Elegant Eats Catering, and established Beverly's Events Planning. My little brother would joke that I'd built a wedding empire while he was learning to code. We'd laugh about how we both created something from nothing, just in different ways. Our bond was unbreakable, or so I thought. Sarah Wilson entered Craig's life 2 years ago through a mutual friend at a tech conference. She was beautiful, intelligent, and came from the kind of established wealth that Craig and I had only seen in movies. Her father, Robert Wilson, owned Wilson Real Estate Development, one of the largest property management companies in the state. Her mother, Patricia, was what people politely called a socialite, meaning she spent her days organizing charity galas and country club events. Sarah worked as a marketing manager for a boutique firm, though everyone knew it was more of a passion project than a necessity. When Craig first brought Sarah to meet me, I was genuinely excited. She seemed sweet, asked thoughtful questions about my business, and praised the intimate dinner I'd prepared at my apartment. Craig was absolutely smitten, and seeing him happy made me happy. Sarah would text me occasionally about event planning tips for her friends' parties, and I always responded enthusiastically, thinking we were building a real relationship. The proposal happened 6 months ago at Sunset Point overlooking the lake. Craig had asked me to coordinate the whole thing, from the photographer hidden in the bushes to the champagne picnic afterward. Sarah said yes, they both cried, and I felt like the luckiest sister in the world. 2 weeks later, Craig came to my office with that familiar nervous energy he'd had since childhood, whenever he needed to ask for something big. Craig sat across from my desk, fidgeting with his coffee cup in a way that immediately transported me back to his teenage years. He'd done the same thing when asking permission to go to prom, when requesting money for college textbooks, when nervously introducing me to his first girlfriend. Some habits never change, and seeing my baby brother still seeking my approval for major life decisions warmed my heart completely. Bev, Sarah, and I have been talking about the wedding, and we want something really special. He began, his voice carrying that same hopeful tone I'd heard 1,000 times before. Not just special, but unforgettable. The kind of celebration that sets the tone for our entire marriage. I leaned forward, already mentally cataloging venues and themes. Of course, honey. What are you thinking, spring wedding summer? I know some absolutely gorgeous locations that would be perfect for whatever vision you two have. That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you. Craig continued, setting down his cup and meeting my eyes directly. Sarah's always dreamed of getting married at the grand ballroom at the Fairmont. You know, the one with the crystal chandeliers and marble floors? She's been picturing it since she was little. I nodded, though something in his tone made me slightly uneasy. The Fairmont was beautiful, certainly, but it was also one of my biggest competitors. Still, this was Craig's wedding, not a business decision. The thing is, he went on, the whole package, venue, catering, flowers, everything Sarah wants, it comes to about $50,000. I've got some savings, but with the down payment I just made on the house and Sarah's student loans, I'm a little short. Before he could even finish the sentence, I was already reaching for my checkbook. Craig, stop. You don't even need to ask. Of course I'll cover it. This is your wedding we're talking about. Mom would have wanted you to have everything perfect. Relief flooded his face so completely that I realized he'd been genuinely worried I might say no. The idea was absurd. In 20 years, had I ever said no to anything he needed? Bev, I promise I'll pay you back. Maybe not right away, but definitely within the first year of marriage. Sarah's getting a promotion soon, and my company is talking about raises. I waved off his protests. This isn't a loan, Craig. This is my gift to you and Sarah. You're my only family, and I want your wedding day to be everything you've ever dreamed of. What happened next still gives me chills when I think about it. Craig's relief transformed into something that should have been a red flag, though I was too blinded by love to see it then. He pulled out his phone and immediately called Sarah. Baby, it's done. Beverly said yes. We can have everything exactly how you wanted. I could hear Sarah's excited squealing through the phone, followed by what sounded like her calling out to someone else in the background. Mom, Dad, it's happening. We can book the Fairmont. Something about that exchange bothered me, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It felt almost like they'd been planning this conversation, like Sarah had been waiting by the phone for confirmation. But I pushed the feeling aside. Of course they'd been hoping I'd say yes. Of course they'd been excited about the possibility. Craig hung up and grabbed my hands across the desk. Bev, I can't tell you what this means to us. Sarah is going to be over the moon. Her whole family is going to be so impressed. That phrase stuck with me long after he left my office. Her whole family is going to be so impressed. Not grateful, not touched by the gesture, but impressed. Like the money itself was what mattered, not the love behind it. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into helping with wedding preparations, even though they'd hired their own planner. I sent Sarah links to florists I'd worked with, offered discounts from my catering contacts, and generally made myself available for any questions or concerns. The responses were polite, but increasingly distant. Sarah would thank me for suggestions, but mentioned they'd already found someone else. Someone her mother had recommended, someone more aligned with their vision. The first real warning sign came during what was supposed to be a casual dinner at the Wilson family home. Sarah had invited Craig and me for Sunday dinner, describing it as a chance for everyone to get to know each other better before the wedding. I spent hours picking out the perfect outfit, something elegant but not flashy, sophisticated, but not trying too hard. I brought a bottle of wine from a vineyard I'd discovered during a corporate retreat, thinking it would be a nice conversation starter. The Wilson house was exactly what I'd expected, sprawling, perfectly landscaped, with the kind of understated luxury that screams old money. Patricia Wilson greeted us at the door wearing what I was pretty sure was a Chanel suit. Her smile warm but somehow not reaching her eyes. Beverly, how lovely to finally meet properly. Sarah has told us so much about your little business ventures. Little business ventures. The phrase hit me like a slap, though Patricia's tone remained perfectly pleasant. I owned 3 successful companies, employed over 50 people, and had built everything from scratch. But in her world, apparently that qualified as cute little hobbies. Dinner was an exercise in subtle condescension disguised as polite conversation. Robert Wilson asked about my event planning hobby and seemed genuinely surprised when I mentioned my annual revenue. Patricia complimented my adorable dress, which I'd bought specifically for this dinner and cost more than most people's rent. Every question felt like a test I hadn't been told I was taking. The worst moment came when Patricia, after her third glass of wine, turned to Craig with a smile that didn't hide the calculation in her eyes. "It's so sweet how close you two siblings are. Most families aren't quite so involved in each other's business decisions. Sarah and I have always believed that marriage is about starting fresh, creating new traditions, rather than carrying forward old dependencies." Craig shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Sarah was suddenly very interested in her dessert plate, refusing to meet my eyes. "Family support has always been important to us," I replied carefully, trying to keep my voice level. "We've only had each other for so long that helping each other succeed feels natural." Of course, Patricia agreed, her tone dripping with false understanding. "Though I imagine Craig is looking forward to the independence that comes with marriage. Building something that's entirely his own, you know." The drive home was awkwardly quiet. Craig kept glancing at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, as we pulled into my driveway, he spoke. "Bev, don't take anything Patricia said personally. She's just protective of Sarah, and sometimes that comes out wrong. She doesn't really know you yet." But I was beginning to suspect that she knew exactly who I was, and that was precisely the problem. The next few months passed in a blur of wedding preparations that felt increasingly distant from my involvement. Every suggestion I made was politely acknowledged and quietly ignored. Every offer to help was graciously declined with explanations about family traditions or specific visions that wouldn't quite work with my ideas. Sarah, who had once texted me photos of dresses and asked for my opinions, now sent brief formal updates about decisions that had already been made. I told myself I was being oversensitive. Planning a wedding was stressful, and everyone handled stress differently. Maybe the Wilson family preferred to keep things in-house. Maybe Sarah was just overwhelmed with choices and found it easier to work with vendors her family already knew and trusted. I made excuses for every slight, rationalized every exclusion, and forced myself to focus on the big picture. Craig was happy, and that's what mattered. The breaking point came when Sarah announced they'd hired Linda Thompson as their wedding planner. I knew Linda professionally. She was competent but incredibly expensive, the kind of planner who charged premium prices for the prestige of her client list rather than the quality of her work. More importantly, Linda specialized in what she called traditional elegance, which was code for old money aesthetic with no room for nouveau riche creativity. When I asked Craig about the choice, he seemed genuinely uncomfortable. Sarah's mom recommended Linda specifically. Apparently she planned Patricia's sister's wedding last year, and it was exactly the kind of elegant, understated celebration Sarah has always wanted. Understated. Another word that felt loaded with meaning I wasn't supposed to understand. What about the planner we discussed 3 months ago? Remember the one who did the beautiful garden wedding at Riverside Manor? Sarah seemed really excited about her portfolio. Craig's expression shifted to something I'd never seen before, a mixture of guilt and irritation that made my stomach clench with unease. "Bev, I appreciate everything you've done, I really do. But maybe it's time I started making some decisions without running them past you first. Sarah and I are building our own life together, and sometimes that means doing things our own way." Our own way. The phrase felt like a door closing, though I couldn't quite understand why. I'd raised Craig to be independent, to think for himself, to make his own choices. So why did this particular independence feel like rejection? I threw myself into my own business with renewed focus, telling myself that stepping back from Craig's wedding planning was healthy for everyone involved. My fall season was packed with corporate events and smaller weddings, each one a reminder of what I did best and why I'd built this company in the first place. I was good at what I did. I was successful, respected, and financially secure. Craig's wedding was just one event among hundreds I dealt with every year. But late at night, when the office was quiet and I was reviewing contracts for upcoming events, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was shifting in my relationship with my brother. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Craig's visits to my office, once a weekly tradition, dwindled to brief appearances when he needed something specific. Even our Sunday dinners, a ritual we'd maintained since he graduated college, started getting canceled due to plans with Sarah's family or wedding-related obligations. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made one last attempt to connect with Sarah directly. I called her office and suggested we meet for coffee, just the two of us, to talk about any last-minute details or concerns she might have. Her assistant put me on hold for nearly 10 minutes before Sarah came on the line. "Beverly, that's so sweet of you to offer, but honestly, everything is completely under control. Linda has been absolutely amazing, and Mom has been such a huge help with all the family coordination stuff. I think we're all set." All set. No mention of the $50,000 that had made their dream wedding possible. No acknowledgement of the time I'd spent researching vendors and venues before they'd hired Linda. No recognition that I was Craig's family too, not just a generous stranger who'd written a check. "Well, if anything comes up, you know I'm always here to help," I offered, hating how desperate I sounded. "Of course, and we'll see you bright and early, Saturday morning. I'm so excited for you to see everything come together." Saturday morning. The wedding. The event I'd funded but apparently wasn't trusted to help plan. The celebration of my brother's new life that felt increasingly like a celebration of leaving his old life behind. I hung up the phone and stared at my calendar. 1 week from today, Craig would be married. He'd start his new life with Sarah and her family, with their traditions and their expectations, and their subtle but unmistakable message that his old life, his old family, his old dependencies weren't quite good enough for the future they were building together. That night, I had a dream about our mother. She was standing in my kitchen, wearing the yellow dress she'd loved so much, looking exactly like she had before the cancer changed everything. In the dream, she was making Craig's favorite chocolate chip cookies, the ones with extra vanilla that filled the whole house with the smell of home. "Beverly, baby," she said without looking up from the mixing bowl. "You've done such a good job taking care of him. But sometimes loving someone means letting them make their own mistakes." I woke up with tears on my cheeks, and a certainty I couldn't explain that something terrible was about to happen. It was a Tuesday morning when Linda Thompson called, and I was sitting in my office reviewing final arrangements for a corporate gala scheduled for the following weekend. The autumn sun was streaming through my windows, highlighting the awards and recognition plaques that lined my walls, visual reminders of the reputation I'd built over 12 years of hard work and determination. I was feeling good, productive, focused on the future rather than dwelling on the growing distance between Craig and me. The phone rang at exactly 10:15, and Linda's voice carried that particular tone of professional discomfort that every business person recognizes immediately. Something was wrong, and she'd been designated to deliver bad news she clearly didn't want to be responsible for. "Beverly, this is Linda Thompson. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, but I have some rather awkward news regarding the Wilson-Craig wedding arrangements." My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. In my experience, conversations that began with phrases like "awkward news" never ended well. "What kind of news, Linda?" There was a pause. The kind of hesitation that comes from someone rehearsing words they've been dreading to say. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the artificially gentle tone that people use when delivering devastating information they want to pretend isn't really that devastating. "The Wilson family has made some last-minute adjustments to the guest list. They've decided to keep the celebration more intimate, more focused on immediate family and very close friends. Unfortunately, this means that your family's invitation has been canceled." The words hit me like a physical blow, though I'm not sure which part was more shocking, the cancellation itself or the casual way she'd said "your family," as if I were some distant relative, rather than the person who'd raised the groom and funded the entire event. "I'm sorry, what do you mean canceled? This is my brother's wedding. I'm not just a guest. I'm family. I understand this is disappointing. Linda continued, her tone becoming even more artificially soothing. The bride's family has very specific ideas about the kind of atmosphere they want to create, and they felt that a smaller, more traditional ceremony would be more appropriate for their vision of the day. Traditional. There was that word again, loaded with implications I was starting to understand all too clearly. Linda, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Let me call Craig directly and sort this out. Actually, Beverly, there's one more thing I need to discuss with you. The Wilson family has asked me to communicate that while your invitation has been canceled, they would very much appreciate it if you could allow them to keep the $50,000 deposit you provided. Since all the arrangements have been finalized and paid for, canceling your attendance won't actually reduce any of the costs. The audacity of it stole my breath completely. They were disinviting me from my own brother's wedding while asking to keep the money I'd provided to make that wedding possible. It was like being slapped and then asked to pay for the privilege. You're telling me that my family is not welcome at Craig's wedding, but my money is... I understand how this might seem confusing, Linda replied, though her tone suggested she understood exactly how insulting this was and simply didn't care. But from a practical standpoint, all the vendors have been paid, the venue is booked, the catering numbers are set. Your financial contribution has already been incorporated into the event planning, and reversing those arrangements at this point would be extremely complicated and expensive. Where is Craig in all of this? Have you spoken to him directly about canceling his sister's invitation to his own wedding? Another pause, longer this time, and when Linda spoke again, there was something almost apologetic in her voice. Craig asked me to handle this conversation directly with you. He felt that having a neutral third party facilitate this discussion would be easier for everyone involved. Easier for everyone involved. My brother, the man I'd raised from adolescence to adulthood, the person I'd sacrificed my own education to support, had decided that canceling my invitation to his wedding was a conversation too difficult to have himself. He'd outsourced the task to a wedding planner, like I was a troublesome vendor to be managed rather than his sister. Linda, I need to think about this. This is a lot to process, and I'm going to need some time to understand what's really happening here. Of course, Beverly. I completely understand. But I do need to mention that the Wilson family is hoping for a quick resolution to this situation. The wedding is only 5 days away, and they'd like to finalize all the arrangements without any lingering uncertainties. Lingering uncertainties. Like my presence at my brother's wedding was a problem to be solved, rather than a celebration to be shared. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring at the phone for nearly an hour, trying to process what had just happened. My mind kept circling back to the same impossible reality. I had been disinvited from Craig's wedding by people who wanted to keep the money I'd contributed, but eliminate the person who'd provided it. I tried calling Craig immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I sent a text asking him to call me urgently, but received no response. I tried calling his office, but his assistant said he was in meetings all day and couldn't be disturbed. Every avenue of communication seemed to have been conveniently blocked. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was pacing my office like a caged animal, my mind racing between disbelief, hurt, and a growing anger that felt dangerous in its intensity. This wasn't just about a wedding invitation. This was about respect, loyalty, and the fundamental question of whether the person I devoted my adult life to supporting saw me as family or as an embarrassment to be hidden when it became socially convenient. I tried one more time to reach Craig, and this time he answered on the second ring. Bev, I can't really talk right now. I'm about to go into another meeting. Craig, Linda called me today. We need to discuss what's happening with the wedding. Silence. Long telling silence that confirmed he knew exactly why I was calling and had been avoiding this conversation all day. Can we talk about this tonight? Maybe I could come by your place after work. No, Craig. We're going to talk about this right now. Are you seriously disinviting me from your own wedding? His sigh carried the weight of guilt and resignation that told me everything I needed to know before he said a single word. I didn't wait for Craig to come to me. By 5:30 that evening, I was standing outside his apartment building using the spare key he'd given me years ago for emergencies. This felt like an emergency of the highest order. The betrayal was eating at me like acid, and I needed answers that couldn't be delivered through careful phone conversations or diplomatic text messages. I could hear voices inside as I climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment. Craig's familiar tenor mixed with Sarah's higher-pitched laughter, and what sounded like another woman's voice. When I opened the door, I found Craig and Sarah sitting at their dining room table, with Patricia Wilson surrounded by wedding magazines' fabric samples and what appeared to be seating charts spread across every available surface. The conversation stopped abruptly when I walked in, and the silence that followed felt heavy with guilt and resentment. Craig's face went pale. Sarah looked like she'd been caught doing something she knew was wrong, and Patricia Wilson's expression shifted from surprise to annoyance to something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Beverly," Craig said, standing up so quickly that his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "I wasn't expecting you. We were just going over some last-minute wedding details." "Last-minute details?" I repeated, looking at the seating charts that clearly didn't include my name anywhere. "Like finalizing the guest list." Sarah started to say something, but Patricia placed a restraining hand on her arm and spoke instead. "Beverly, I'm glad you're here. This gives us a chance to discuss the wedding arrangements like civilized adults." "Civilized adults," I said, feeling my temper rise despite my efforts to stay calm. "Is that what civilized adults do? Disinvite family members while keeping their money?" Craig stepped between us, his hands raised in a gesture that was probably meant to be calming, but felt more like he was trying to manage a situation he'd created and now couldn't control. "Bev, please. Let's all just sit down and talk through this rationally." Rationally? I could hear my voice getting louder, but I was past caring about volume control. "Craig helped me understand the rational thought process that led to canceling your sister's invitation to your wedding while keeping the $50,000 she gave you to pay for it." Sarah finally found her voice, though she wouldn't meet my eyes when she spoke. "Beverly, you're wonderful, and we both appreciate everything you've done for us. But this wedding is about Craig and me starting fresh, beginning our new life together. My family has very specific traditions around weddings, and they believe that keeping the ceremony intimate and focused on immediate family creates a more meaningful experience." "Immediate family," I repeated slowly. "And I'm not immediate family." "That's not what she meant." Craig jumped in, but his defense sounded weak even to him. Patricia Wilson leaned back in her chair with the confidence of someone who'd been controlling conversations like this her entire life. "Beverly, let me be frank with you. Sarah comes from a family with certain expectations about social events. The kind of wedding we're planning requires a very specific guest list, people who understand the traditions and protocols that make these occasions successful. Your background is lovely, I'm sure, but it's simply not aligned with the kind of celebration we're creating." The mask had finally come off. No more polite euphemisms about intimacy or fresh starts. This was about class status and the belief that I wasn't good enough to be seen at their precious traditional wedding. "My background," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "You mean the background that includes working 3 jobs to put Craig through college? The background that built a successful business empire from nothing? The background that made this wedding financially possible in the first place?" "Your success is admirable," Patricia continued with the kind of condescending tone that made my skin crawl. "But success in business doesn't necessarily translate to understanding the nuances of high society events. Sarah's wedding needs to reflect the values and standards of both families, and frankly, we're concerned that having certain elements present might detract from the elegant atmosphere we're trying to create." Certain elements. She was calling me a certain element like I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I turned to Craig, searching his face for any sign that he was as horrified by his future mother-in-law's words as I was. "Craig, is this really how you feel? Do you honestly believe that I'm an embarrassment who would detract from your wedding?" He couldn't meet my eyes, and in that moment of avoidance, I got my answer more clearly than any words could have provided. "It's not about embarrassment, Bev. It's about moving forward. Sarah's family has offered to pay for everything if we keep the guest list to people they know and trust. Her father has connections that could really help my career, and Patricia has already introduced Sarah to women who could become important professional contacts. So this is about money and connections, I said, feeling something fundamental break inside my chest. You're trading your family for their family because their money comes with better networking opportunities. Sarah finally looked at me directly, and what I saw in her eyes was worse than hatred. It was pity mixed with determination. Beverly, you can keep being Craig's sister. Nobody is trying to eliminate you from his life completely. We're just asking for some space to build our new life without the complications that come from old dependencies. Old dependencies. 20 years of sacrifice, support, and unconditional love reduced to old dependencies that were inconvenient for their fresh start. The $50,000, I said quietly. What happens to that? Craig's face reddened, but he lifted his chin with a defiance that looked foreign on features I'd known since he was 16. We're keeping it, Bev. Consider it payback for all those years I owed you. You always said family doesn't keep score, right? Well, this balances the books. Payback. He was calling my love, my sacrifice, my devotion to his future, a debt that he could now settle with cruelty disguised as independence. I looked around the room at these three people who had apparently spent months planning this conversation, this carefully orchestrated rejection designed to eliminate me while keeping my money. Sarah was arranging the fabric samples like nothing dramatic was happening. Patricia was checking her phone with the bored expression of someone waiting for an unpleasant task to be completed. Craig was staring at the floor like a child who knew he was being terrible, but was committed to seeing it through. I understand now, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. This was never about wedding planning or guest lists or traditions. This was about finding a way to cut me out of your life while keeping the benefits I provided. I walked to the door, then turned back to look at my brother one more time. You're right about one thing, Craig. It is time for you to be independent. Completely independent. I left the apartment feeling strangely calm, like the shock had pushed me past anger into a space where everything was crystal clear. They wanted to keep my money while eliminating my presence. They wanted the benefits of family without the inconvenience of actually treating me like family. But they'd made one crucial mistake in their planning. They'd forgotten exactly how much power I actually had. I spent that entire night sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that grew cold hours ago, staring at the stack of contracts and vendor agreements I'd pulled from my office files. Every detail of Craig's wedding was spread out in front of me like a battle plan, and for the first time since Linda's phone call, I was beginning to see the complete picture of what had actually happened. The Wilson family hadn't just decided to exclude me from the wedding. They'd systematically planned to use my resources while eliminating my presence, and they'd been doing it for months. Every vendor they'd hired, every service they'd booked, every detail of their dream wedding was connected to my business empire in ways they clearly didn't understand. The venue, grandiose ballroom, my flagship property, and the most prestigious event space in the city. The catering elegant Eats My Restaurant company that had earned a James Beard nomination 2 years running. The wedding planning coordination Linda Thompson, who was actually a subcontractor who worked exclusively with Beverly's events planning for high-end celebrations. The flowers, the music, the transportation, the photography. Every single vendor was either owned by me directly or worked primarily through contracts with my companies. The Wilson family had been so focused on their social climbing and status preservation that they'd failed to do basic research about who was actually providing the services for their precious traditional wedding. I pulled out my laptop and started making a list. 23 separate vendor contracts, all either directly owned by my companies or working through partnership agreements that gave me significant influence over their availability and pricing. The Wilson family had essentially hired me to plan and execute an event they'd decided I wasn't worthy to attend. The irony was so complete, it was almost funny. Almost. By 6 a.m, I'd reviewed every contract, every agreement, every legal document that connected my business empire to Craig's wedding. The picture was clear. I owned or controlled every single element of their celebration. The venues, the food, the flowers, the music, the coordination, even the transportation to and from the church, were all connected to my companies. Patricia Wilson had been so focused on excluding the certain elements she found objectionable that she'd failed to realize those elements owned the entire foundation of her daughter's dream wedding. I made coffee, showered, and dressed in my most professional business suit. Then I drove to my office and called an emergency meeting with my 3 company managers. If the Wilson family wanted to treat this situation like a business transaction, rather than a family celebration, then we were going to handle it exactly like the business transaction they'd created. My lawyer Harold arrived at 9:30, reviewed the contracts I'd assembled, and confirmed what I already knew. Every single vendor agreement contained clauses that gave me the right to cancel services for any reason with 48 hours' notice. The Wilson family had signed contracts with companies they didn't realize I owned, giving me complete legal authority to shut down their entire wedding with less than a week's notice. "Beverly," Harold said, looking up from the stack of papers, "you understand that exercising these cancellation rights will completely destroy their wedding, right? We're talking about canceling everything 5 days before the event. They'll never find replacement vendors with this short notice." "Harold?" "They canceled my invitation to my brother's wedding while demanding to keep the $50,000 I contributed to make it possible. They called me a certain element that would detract from their elegant atmosphere. They sent a wedding planner to tell me I wasn't good enough for their guest list, but my money was welcome to stay." Harold nodded slowly. "So this is about more than business contracts. This is about respect," I corrected, "and the consequences of treating family like disposable resources." I spent the rest of the day making phone calls, reviewing logistics, and preparing for what was either going to be the most satisfying professional decision of my career or the most destructive personal choice I'd ever made. By 5 o'clock, I'd confirmed that every vendor was prepared to follow my instructions, every contract was legally sound, and every element of Craig's wedding was under my complete control. I tried calling Craig one more time, giving him a final opportunity to have an honest conversation about what was happening between us. His phone went straight to voicemail, and when I called his office, his assistant said he'd taken a personal day to handle wedding preparations. Wedding preparations. He was spending the day preparing for a wedding he'd decided I wasn't worthy to attend. That night I made the decision that would either restore my self-respect or destroy my relationship with my brother forever. I was going to exercise my legal right to cancel every single vendor contract connected to his wedding. Not out of revenge, but out of principle. If I wasn't good enough to be family, then my businesses weren't good enough to provide their services. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me grateful to be alive and working in an industry that celebrated life's most important moments. But as I drove toward Grandiose Ballroom at 6:30 in the morning, I felt nothing but a cold determination that surprised me with its intensity. The vendors were already arriving when I pulled into the parking lot. Flowers, linens, catering equipment, sound systems, everything needed to transform my elegant ballroom into Sarah Wilson's dream wedding venue. My staff was efficient and professional, as always completely unaware that they were about to participate in the most dramatic cancellation in my company's 12-year history. I walked through the main entrance and found Linda Thompson directing the setup with the kind of frantic energy that comes from managing a high-pressure event with demanding clients. She looked up when she saw me, and confusion flickered across her face. "Beverly, I wasn't expecting you here today. Is there something you need from the venue?" "Actually, Linda, there's something I need to discuss with everyone who's working on the Wilson wedding." I called for the attention of every vendor coordinator and staff member in the ballroom. About 30 people stopped what they were doing and gathered around me with the kind of polite attention that event professionals give to unexpected announcements. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to inform you that the Wilson-Craig wedding scheduled for this afternoon has been canceled. Please begin packing up all equipment, flowers, food preparation, and decorations immediately." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the heating system cycling on in the background. Linda Thompson looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Beverly, what are you talking about? The wedding is in 6 hours. Guests are traveling from out of state. The bride is probably getting her hair done right now. The event has been canceled, I repeated calmly. All vendor contracts are being terminated as of this moment. Everyone will be compensated for their time and materials according to their agreements, but no services will be provided for this wedding. You can't do this, Linda said, her voice rising to a pitch that bordered on hysteria. You don't have the authority to cancel someone else's wedding. I pulled out the folder of contracts I'd brought with me and handed them to Linda. Actually, I have complete authority. Every vendor here works for companies that I own. Every service being provided today is controlled by Beverly's Events Planning, Elegant Eats Catering, or Grandiose Ballroom Management. I'm exercising my legal right to terminate these contracts. Linda frantically flipped through the papers, her face growing paler with each page she reviewed. But you're not the client. The Wilson family booked these services. The Wilson family booked services from companies they didn't realize I owned. They wanted to exclude me from their celebration while using my businesses to make that celebration possible. I'm simply declining to provide those services. My phone started ringing immediately. Linda was calling what I assumed was Patricia Wilson, probably screaming about the vendors packing up the wedding decorations. Within 20 minutes, my phone was buzzing with increasingly frantic calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I answered the call from Robert Wilson himself. Ms. Beverly, this is Robert Wilson. I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding about today's wedding services. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Wilson. I'm canceling all vendor services for your daughter's wedding. You can't do that. We have contracts. We've paid deposits. This is completely unprofessional. Mr. Wilson, 3 days ago, your wife called me a certain element who would detract from your elegant wedding atmosphere. Yesterday, your family told me I wasn't good enough to attend my brother's wedding, but my money was good enough to keep. Today, I'm informing you that my businesses aren't good enough to provide services for clients who don't respect the people behind those businesses. This is ridiculous. You're destroying a young couple's wedding day over some personal grudge. I'm exercising my legal right to choose my clients, I replied. And I choose not to work with families who treat vendors like disposable resources. The next call came from Craig, and his voice was a mixture of panic and rage that I'd never heard before. Bev, what the hell are you doing? Sarah is hysterical. There are 200 guests expecting a wedding in 5 hours. Craig, 3 days ago, you told me to consider the $50,000 I gave you as payback for all the years you owed me. Yesterday you called 20 years of supporting you old dependencies that were inconvenient for your new life. Today I'm showing you what independence actually looks like. You can't destroy my wedding over a family argument. I'm not destroying anything, Craig. I'm simply declining to provide services to people who don't want me as family, but expect me to work as their vendor. Bev, please. I know we handled this badly, but Sarah's entire family is already here. Her grandmother flew in from Florida. This will humiliate her in front of everyone she knows. For a moment, hearing the genuine desperation in my brother's voice, I almost wavered. 20 years of protecting him from consequences kicked in, and part of me wanted to call everything off and pretend this conversation had never happened. But then I remembered Patricia Wilson's satisfied smile when she called me a certain element. I remembered Sarah's pitying expression when she talked about old dependencies. I remembered Craig's defiant chin when he called my love payback for debts owed. Craig, you made a choice to prioritize Sarah's family's approval over your relationship with me. You decided that their money and connections were more valuable than the person who raised you. Those were your decisions, and today you get to live with the consequences. But the venue, the catering, everything is yours. You're sabotaging your own business. My business will survive losing one wedding. The question is whether our relationship will survive you choosing to treat me like a disposable resource. I hung up the phone and watched my staff efficiently pack up 12 hours of preparation work. The flowers were loaded back into trucks, the linens were folded and removed, the catering equipment was wheeled out through the service entrance. Within 2 hours, grandiose ballroom looked exactly like it had at 6 o'clock that morning, elegant, empty, and completely unavailable for the Wilson family's dream wedding. At 11:30, Patricia Wilson herself arrived, storming through the front entrance in what was clearly her mother of the bride outfit, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You vindictive, petty little woman! How dare you destroy my daughter's wedding over some imaginary slight? Mrs. Wilson, there was nothing imaginary about your assessment of my character or my worthiness to attend your daughter's wedding. I'm simply accepting your evaluation and declining to provide services to people who find me objectionable. This is business. Personal feelings have nothing to do with professional obligations. Actually, Mrs. Wilson, personal feelings have everything to do with how I choose to run my businesses. And I choose not to work with clients who treat family members like disposable resources while expecting professional services from those same family members." Patricia Wilson's face was purple with rage, but she couldn't argue with the logic. She'd created this situation by demanding the benefits of my resources while rejecting my presence, and now she was discovering that those two things were inseparably connected. By noon, Grandiose Ballroom was completely empty except for my security staff. The Wilson family was frantically calling every venue in the city, discovering what I already knew: absolutely nothing was available for a same-day wedding reception for 200 guests. Sarah Wilson's dream wedding, the elegant celebration that was supposed to launch her new life with my brother, had been reduced to a ceremony in an empty church followed by nothing. The aftermath unfolded exactly as I'd predicted, though watching it happen still felt surreal. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, my phone was buzzing with updates from friends in the industry who were fielding increasingly desperate calls from the Wilson family. Every major venue was booked, every catering company was committed to other events, and every wedding planner in the city was either unavailable or unwilling to attempt a same-day miracle for clients who'd obviously created their own disaster. The ceremony proceeded as scheduled at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, though I heard from my florist that the arrangements looked sparse since all the elaborate bouquets and altar decorations had been packed up and returned that morning. Sarah wore her designer dress and said her vows in front of 200 guests who then had absolutely nowhere to go for the reception they'd been promised. According to Linda Thompson, who called me at 4:30, in a state of complete professional panic, the Wilson family had rented the church's fellowship hall for an impromptu reception. Instead of the elegant 5-course dinner at Grandiose Ballroom, their guests were served grocery store sandwiches and sheet cake in a basement room decorated with crepe paper streamers that Patricia Wilson had apparently purchased at a drugstore during the ceremony. The wedding that was supposed to demonstrate the Wilson family's social status and refined taste had become a community potluck in a church basement, and everyone present knew exactly why the change had occurred. Linda had been forced to explain to confused guests that there had been vendor issues that resulted in the cancellation of all reception services, though she carefully avoided mentioning that those vendor issues involved the groom's sister owning every company they'd hired. Craig called me at 6 o'clock, and his voice sounded completely defeated. "Bev, Sarah hasn't spoken to me since the ceremony ended. Her father spent the entire reception telling anyone who would listen that this was the most humiliating day of his family's life. Her grandmother left early and said she'd never seen such poor planning in 60 years of attending weddings. Craig, how did you explain to people what happened? What could I say that my sister canceled our wedding because we didn't invite her? Everyone wanted to know why my own family wasn't at my wedding, and when I tried to explain about keeping the guest list small, people kept asking where you were. And what did you tell them?" Silence. Long, painful silence that told me Craig was finally beginning to understand the social implications of his choices. "I told them you were traveling for business and couldn't make it. But Bev, everyone knows that's not true. Your business is here. Your life is here. Nobody believed that you'd miss your only brother's wedding for work. So people think there's been some kind of family falling out." "Yeah, and Sarah's family is blaming me for not managing the situation better. Patricia keeps saying that if I'd handled my family relationships more carefully, none of this would have happened." The irony was perfect. Craig had chosen Sarah's family over me to gain their approval and support, and now they were blaming him for the consequences of that choice. He'd traded his relationship with me for acceptance from people who were now holding him responsible for the disaster that acceptance had created. What happens now, Craig? I don't know, Bev. Sarah barely looked at me during the reception. Her father pulled me aside and said that this kind of family drama was exactly what they'd been concerned about from the beginning. He said it proved that my background wasn't compatible with their expectations for Sarah's marriage. Robert Wilson had managed to turn Craig's betrayal of me into evidence that Craig wasn't good enough for his daughter. The same man who'd encouraged Craig to exclude me was now using that exclusion as proof that Craig came from an unsuitable family. Are you happy with the choice you made, Craig? Another long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. No, Bev, I'm not happy. I thought choosing Sarah's family would make my life easier, more stable, more successful. But now I feel like I don't belong anywhere. Sarah's family sees me as the person who brought chaos to their perfect wedding, and you? I don't even know if you still consider me your brother after what I did. For the first time in days, I felt something other than anger when I thought about Craig. He sounded lost, confused, and genuinely remorseful in a way that reminded me of the 16-year-old boy who'd cried in my arms when our mother died. Craig, I will always be your sister, but I will never again be someone you can use and discard based on what's convenient for your other relationships. I know I messed up, Bev. I know I hurt you in ways that probably can't be fixed, but I don't know how to undo what I've done. You can't undo it, Craig. You can only decide who you want to be moving forward. After I hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the city lights and thinking about the strange justice of what had happened. The Wilson family had wanted to exclude me while keeping my money, and they'd ended up with neither my presence nor my services. Craig had wanted to choose social advancement over family loyalty, and he'd ended up with neither social acceptance nor family support. The $50,000 I'd given them was gone, but it had been the cost of learning something invaluable about the people I'd thought I could trust. Some lessons are expensive, but the education is worth the price. I made one final decision that night. Instead of trying to recover the money Craig and Sarah had kept, I donated an equivalent amount to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students who were working to support younger siblings. If my sacrifice for Craig's future had been dismissed as payback for old debts, then I would use that money to help other people who understood the value of family loyalty and personal sacrifice. The scholarship would be awarded annually to students who demonstrated exceptional commitment to supporting their families while pursuing their own education. It would be called the Martha Beverly Foundation, named after my mother and the values she'd taught me about taking care of the people you love. Craig's wedding had ended in disaster, but something meaningful would grow from the ashes of that disaster. Sometimes the best revenge is using your pain to help other people avoid making the same mistakes. 6 months passed before Craig and I spoke again, and when he finally called, I could hear exhaustion in his voice that went deeper than just physical tiredness. Sarah had moved back in with her parents 3 weeks after the wedding, citing the need for space to process the traumatic beginning to their marriage. The Wilson family had made it clear that they blamed Craig entirely for the wedding disaster and expected him to find a way to make amends for the embarrassment he'd caused their family. Craig had spent those months trying to rebuild his relationship with his wife while simultaneously dealing with the professional consequences of his choices. Robert Wilson had withdrawn a promised job recommendation, Patricia Wilson had excluded Craig from family gatherings, and Sarah herself had become distant and resentful in ways that made their new marriage feel more like a punishment than a celebration. Bev, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out completely before you respond. I settled into my office chair and prepared myself for whatever Craig was about to reveal. Sarah and I are getting divorced. She filed papers last week, and I'm not going to contest it. The marriage has been over since the wedding day, and we've both been too stubborn to admit it. I felt surprisingly little satisfaction in hearing this news. Part of me had hoped that Craig would find happiness with Sarah, despite the terrible way their relationship had affected our family bond. I'm sorry to hear that, Craig. Divorce is always difficult regardless of the circumstances. The thing is, Bev, the divorce isn't really about the wedding disaster. It's about what the wedding disaster revealed about who I am and what I value. Sarah's family spent 6 months showing me exactly what conditional love looks like, and I finally understood that I'd already experienced unconditional love for 20 years without appreciating it. Craig's voice broke slightly, and I could tell he was struggling to continue. You loved me without requiring me to be different, better, more successful, or more socially acceptable. You supported my dreams without asking me to abandon my history. You invested in my future without demanding that I cut ties with my past. And I threw all of that away because I thought conditional acceptance from wealthy people was more valuable than unconditional love from family. Craig, what are you asking from me? I'm asking if there's any way we can rebuild our relationship on terms that respect what you've done for me and acknowledge how badly I failed you. I'm not asking you to pretend that nothing happened or to go back to the way things were before. I'm asking if you're willing to let me earn your trust again slowly over time with actions instead of words. I'd been thinking about this conversation for months, imagining what I would say if Craig ever reached out with genuine remorse and a real understanding of what had gone wrong between us. The anger had faded, replaced by a sadness that felt cleaner and more manageable than the rage I'd carried for so long. Craig, I never stopped loving you, but I did stop trusting you. Trust has to be rebuilt through consistent behavior over time, not through conversations or promises. I understand that, Bev, and I'm prepared to do whatever work is necessary to prove that I've learned from this experience. Over the following year, Craig slowly demonstrated that he'd genuinely changed his understanding of family loyalty and the difference between earning someone's respect and buying someone's approval. He started small, regular phone calls, remembering important dates, asking about my business and personal life without any agenda attached to the questions. He also made concrete amends. Craig took a part-time job on weekends and used that income to repay the $50,000 he'd kept from the wedding fund, though I directed him to donate it to the Martha Beverly Foundation rather than returning it to me personally. He wrote letters of apology to my business partners who'd been affected by the wedding cancellation, taking full responsibility for the situation, and praising the professionalism of my staff during a difficult circumstance. Most importantly, Craig began rebuilding his own life based on values he'd chosen, rather than expectations others had imposed on him. He left his high-pressure corporate job and started a small software consulting business, focused on helping nonprofit organizations improve their technology systems. The work paid less than his previous career, but aligned with his actual interests and values in ways that made him visibly happier and more confident. 18 months after the wedding disaster, Craig met Jennifer, a teacher who'd grown up in a working-class family and understood the value of loyalty, hard work, and genuine connection. When he brought her to meet me, the difference was immediately obvious. Jennifer was interested in hearing stories about Craig's childhood, asked thoughtful questions about our mother, and expressed genuine appreciation for the relationship that had shaped the man she'd fallen in love with. "Beverly," Jennifer said during that first dinner, "Craig has told me so much about how you raised him and supported his dreams. I hope you know that I consider myself incredibly lucky to be with someone who learned about commitment and sacrifice from watching how you lived your values." 2 years later, when Craig and Jennifer got engaged, he called to ask if I would help them plan their wedding. Not because they needed my money, but because they wanted the celebration to be meaningful to the people who mattered most to them. "Bev, I know I have no right to ask this after everything that happened with Sarah, but would you consider planning our wedding? Jennifer and I want something simple and genuine, focused on family and the people who've supported us. We can't think of anyone we'd rather have coordinate the day that starts our marriage." This time, the wedding planning process felt completely different. Craig and Jennifer included me in every decision, valued my opinions and expertise, and made it clear that my presence was the most important element of their celebration. The ceremony took place in the garden behind my house, with 50 guests who genuinely cared about the couple and understood the significance of the commitment they were making. During his toast at the reception, Craig looked directly at me and spoke words that finally healed the wounds his first wedding had created. 2 years ago, I made the mistake of thinking that love was something you had to earn through performance and conformity. I chose status over authenticity, approval over loyalty, and conditional acceptance over unconditional love. The person who taught me the difference, who showed me what real commitment looks like, and who loved me enough to let me face the consequences of my choices, is my sister Beverly. Jennifer and I are standing here today because Bev refused to enable my worst impulses and instead demonstrated what family actually means. The applause that followed felt like absolution, not just for Craig's mistakes, but for my decision to stand up for my own worth when standing up required courage I wasn't sure I possessed. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to accept their worst behavior. Sometimes protecting your own dignity teaches other people how to find theirs. And sometimes the relationships that survive crisis become stronger than the relationships that never face any challenges at all. Family isn't about biology or obligation or unconditional acceptance of bad behavior. Family is about people who choose to show up for each other, especially when showing up is difficult, inconvenient, or costly. Real love requires boundaries. Respect requires reciprocity, and trust requires consistency between words and actions. The Martha Beverly Foundation now provides scholarships to 30 students annually, young people who understand the weight of responsibility, the value of sacrifice, and the difference between earning something and expecting it as a birthright. Every year when I meet the scholarship recipients, I'm reminded that painful experiences can be transformed into meaningful contributions if we're willing to use our wounds to help other people heal. Craig and Jennifer will celebrate their first anniversary next month, and they've asked me to help them plan a small party to mark the occasion. This time, there won't be any question about who belongs on the guest list, who deserves respect, or whose love is conditional on social performance. This time, we all understand that the most valuable things in life can't be bought, borrowed, or stolen. They can only be earned through authentic connection, genuine commitment, and the kind of loyalty that survives even when survival requires strength you didn't know you had. What do you think about standing up for yourself when family treats you like a disposable resource? Have you ever had to choose between maintaining peace and maintaining your dignity? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if you've faced similar situations with family members who took your support for granted. Don't forget to like this video. If my story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life family drama stories and share this with anyone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's willingness to recognize it. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most difficult conversations lead to the most meaningful changes. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly value what you bring to their lives.